Dr. JC here, Tech and Society, Ancient India. We just left Persia. We're going to pick up in India now. Now, we're not going to talk specifically about the various ancient civilizations, whether they be Harappan, Aryan, Mauryan at all, but look specifically at technology and society across these several civilizations. Now, ancient Indians, like most ancient peoples, and hell, for that matter, modern folks, they're going to make use of existing materials whenever possible to help expedite transportation, trade, and just help build out their society. The plated bamboo suspension bridge here is one example of that. Beyond the basic use of materials, however, we do focus on in ancient India, even unto present day, their ability to not only manipulate stone, but their ability to not only create but manipulate iron. I mean, we're talking advanced metallurgy here. In some sense, these guys are the original materials scientists. And the Iron Pillar of Delhi here is a perfect example of that. Now, while I don't plan on getting into the hard history of the Iron Pillar here, that's stuff that you guys can Google if you're interested on your own. What I am interested in pointing out here, however, is that this thing's been sitting out for, 1,500 years, pushing 2,000 years now. And there's a very light layer of rust across the entire pillar, and this is made of iron. So the question is, how in the blue blazes were these guys able to keep rust, corrosion, off of iron that's been sitting out in the elements for 1,500 plus years? That's a question that scientists still look at today. And it does give us some sense, or at least appreciation, for the advanced metallurgy that Indians had been able to achieve and continue to achieve to present day. Now, beyond the work with iron, ancient Indians are also remembered for their work with steel, creation of a crucible steel, or woots is sometimes a name given to it. Now, you may have heard of Damascus steel, although I think the word Damascus gives us the wrong sort of geographic focus, because we naturally think of modern-day Damascus in Syria or the Near East, rather than we do southern India, where this process was actually started. So ancient Indians themselves, masters of this process of creating this steel into blades, whether used for culinary purposes or out on the battlefield. And in fact, they were prized blades largely because they were so powerful. What's interesting as it relates to steel and the Indian process of creating it in a crucible is that we also see this happen in Viking lands, in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. And in the 800s and 900s, we start to see the use of crucibles to create steel. And we have evidence of that, archaeological evidence, through these Ulfber, the famed Ulfber swords of Northern Europe. And what's interesting to me is that we kind of get hung up today on these buzzwords like globalization, as if somehow global trade is something new. My question to you all would be, well, if global trade is something new, how in the world did the creation of steel in a crucible that was designed in southern India find its way all the way up into Scandinavia, in Viking lands? Further in Europe and beyond these Ulfber swords, or crucible process of making steel, we also see the emergence of not only sugar, but muslin. In fact, muslin, second to only, one could argue, to cotton, and cotton's production would actually come later in a more modern world. Muslin was a prized cloth. In fact, royalty in Europe were the individuals that could only afford to use muslin. Sugar, too, prized possession, prized in the culinary world, and usually only those with means could afford to have it. Where did these materials come from? You guessed it, ancient India. India made use of these readily available resources, whether it's sugar cane or jute, and figured out a way to extract from nature highly exportable commodities that were prized, especially amongst the wealthy in society, not just within their own society in India, but in Europe as well. Now, in thinking about the select innovations that we've discussed here briefly about ancient India, I want to harken back to ancient China and ancient Persia, and repeat the pattern here with ancient India of posing a little question for everyone to consideration. Again, not anything that you guys have to answer, but one to consider. Now, we're starting to see emerge a pattern here of trade and innovation slash entrepreneurship. And if those two are in ready supply within a society, that generally equates to wealth and strength within a civilization. Thinking about trade specifically, however, I want to pose this question to you. How might trade with the outside world invite into your own world or society ideas, goods, and or people that you might not necessarily want to have within your borders? Put another way, while trade certainly has its benefits, what are some of the potential cons associated with trade as well? And I want you to think about that, not just as we consider China, Persia, and India, but as we consider Egypt, Mesoamerica, and Greece, where we head next. Dr. JC out from India. We'll pick up with Egypt next.